Okay, so I'm recording now. We were going to do an opening, but we were talking, so we're just going to jump in. So, Brandon, the impeachment, and let's start with the Democrats first. Is it absolute total ignorance, or is it utter incompetence, their performance during this impeachment? Because again, you picked the thing, incitement, which had a criminal definition, and you allowed the impeachment to be viewed and scored, I think, by the public as a criminal proceeding. That's not what an impeachment is.
It's not. And Trump's attorneys use that to their benefit, right? Because they spoke in legal terms and said there isn't any legal grounds here. Well, this isn't a legal proceeding. It's a political proceeding, and we should all be reminded of that. And I don't know why, Craig, they didn't add in the charge of dereliction of duty. Why not have that as a charge? And that way there's a backup charge at least. There should have been two charges. I don't know why they only went with one anyway.
They referenced that. They amended that. And then they never argued it. They never argued it.
And that wasn't a charge that they put forward, and voted on. And I feel like that was the more compelling, stronger charge, right? Because it was his inaction of the day coupled with his statements and everything leading up to that. See, with the dereliction of duty, you can pull all of that in. The incitement charge is limiting, and it rests more on a legal criminal defense, which has to be proven. It's more specious. Now, again, all that said, I did think the House managers did a much more effective case, presented a much more effective case than they did during the first impeachment. It was much more direct. There wasn't as much ambiguity. So for those that did present, I thought they did well. But again, they limited themselves with this charge, and I don't know why.
They showed a video. That's what they did. They showed a video.
It was a pretty damning video, though.
We could have did this.
Yeah,
I just don't get it. You picked a fight, and then you said, I'm not going to go all the way. Impeachment is a street brawl. It's a political fight. If you pull a knife, stick him.
Can you guys let me know, because maybe I missed this, because I've tried to watch as much of it as possible, but I know I've missed bits and pieces. Did they ever really go through the timeline coherently? Because the Washington Post had a great write-up of the timeline of events on that day, coupled with Trump's statements and what was done. And I feel like that was something that wasn't conveyed as clearly, that could have also been a game changer.
Well, a little bit of that was in the video, but then I thought they went through it more thoroughly Wednesday, at least from the recap I read. I didn't see it all on Wednesday.
But they didn't go through it extensively enough, to your point, Brandon, that we knew when was Trump's tweet versus when.
Like the minute or whatever?
Minute by minute, yeah.
I didn't see any video presentation on that. I didn't see a big graphic with the timeline
put out. And that's the thing. The Washington Post had a great graphic, like minute by minute, time, everything that was going on with what Trump was tweeting, what he was being told by aides. And I was like, why isn't this being entered as testimony evidence by the House impeachment managers? Just use this graphic that the Post was able to put together.
Would it have made a difference, though?
Is that where we're at?
This is also a case of the American people, right? We all knew that it was going to be very difficult to get 17 Republican senators. So this is partially a case of the American people on accountability, just as it is, to Senate Republicans in many ways.
Well, and that's my question. So in the court of public opinion, has anything changed?
No. I mean, you texted out that poll today, Jason, that you read, that 69% of Republicans said they would have a hard time voting for their current representative if they voted to impeach Trump.
Which gives you every political reason for these people not to vote to impeach.
The other irony with this vote, and again, the votes weren't there for conviction, but at the same time, I don't want to gloss over the historic impact of this vote, because this was the most bipartisan impeachment ever, even with just 7 Senate Republicans. And it's the first time we've had an impeachment vote where we had over 50 members of the Senate vote to convict as well. That didn't happen with Clinton's impeachment.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So with Clinton, he had 2 charges. He had the perjury charge, where you only had 45 votes in favor of conviction. And then you had the charge on obstruction of justice, which garnered 50 votes. And then, of course, we know during Trump's first impeachment, they were only able to get 47 and 48 votes in favor of conviction on the 2 charges. So this was a 57-43. So first time you had a simple majority of the Senate ever vote to convict a former president. So that is something to take stock of. But
and I think too, wasn't in the first one, Mitt Romney became the first senator ever to vote to impeach a president of his own party.
yes.
He is joined now by 6 other senators. Were there any surprises in that list? I guess I didn't see Richard Burr. Yeah, that was. I didn't see that one coming, and I didn't put Cassidy when we were making our list of who I thought would vote to convict. I thought Cassidy had already had his moment of courage, and that was as far as he was willing to go. I think he got on the Trump is guilty train too.
Yeah, so that was significant. There were a few others I was surprised that did not vote to convict, despite impending retirements, which I think was, again, there's not much that can be said for that. Still a lot of fear, obviously, within the GOP. So if you look at those who did vote to convict, most of them are, have either just been reelected, so they're not facing the voters for, at least 4 or 5 more years. And then the others are retiring, people like Toomey and Burr. So that is kind of the calculus there as well.
So I'm still trying to process through what role does impeachment have in constraining the president? Because the reason that impeachment is not a criminal proceeding is, let's say the scenario, President A gets on the phone with, we'll pick Justin Trudeau, just because I was thinking about Canada. And those two start to conspire to do something incredibly damaging to the United States. Trump is going to sell Trudeau weapons secrets, or just pick whatever movie plot you want to entertain. Impeachment, where maybe he hasn't broken any law yet, but for national security, he needs to be removed immediately. That's why there is no such thing as a snap impeachment. Impeachment is designed that if you have to do it quickly, you can do it quickly. It's designed not to go through a criminal process, because the president's behavior doesn't have to rise to that of criminal in order to justify being removed from the office. And if we don't get that, and if we don't understand that, and that's not what we're going to do, then we need to wipe that part of the Constitution out. I know, the sacred document that can never be touched, and maybe reimagine something that might accidentally work. Jason, if you had to do impeachment 2.0, not Trump, but revising it, what could work?
I mean, you could loosen it and try for a simple majority. But then I can see the slippery slope of now, as soon as you've got one side angry enough, boom, they're out.
Yep.
So I'd be curious to compare it to other democracies' use of vote of no confidence. Like, would there be something to doing that? Does anybody know how well that works with the British government, for example?
Yeah, with the vote of no confidence, I believe that is that's usually done within the party. So that's the vote of no confidence within the party for their leader, and that is a simple majority, and that's how that works.
The key there is they're able to elect a different leader from their own party, right? So there's less risk for them to do that.
Yeah, and so that person is just replaced. There's no snap election. The prime minister just becomes replaced with another leader from the existing party. So there's less risk involved. There's no political risk, and everybody isn't already kind of up for re-election. So that's kind of a difference with parliamentary systems. And that does happen more often in parliamentary systems. We do see that.
So maybe that's an option. But I mean, Craig, your opening question of what's the point of ever trying to do this again? I don't know now. I mean, if you, you'd have to shoot somebody in Times Square to get thrown out.
Apparently, but why not change it to a simple majority? I mean, the fact is, like I said, we haven't until today. We haven't had a prior impeachment trial garner a simple majority in favor of impeachment. So it's very difficult to even get a simple majority.
That's a fascinating stat. I didn't know that. That might have made me feel better half an hour ago.
And that includes 1, 2, 3 former impeachment trials. Neither of them reached more than 50 votes.
Historically speaking, you're right, Brett. This is a landslide for 7 Republicans, or for 7 members of the party of the president not being impeached to vote. That is incredibly historic. It falls way short of what we need to take an action, which in some ways just seems to be a microcosm for the whole country right now. More than 51% agree on something, but God forbid we do something about it. And
the other irony was, Craig, that this vote actually kind of mirrored public sentiment. It's interesting because most of the polling out there shows 56 to 57% of the American public favoring conviction.
Yeah.
So,
and isn't Brendan in a parliamentary system? If Trump existed in a parliamentary system, if we just decide he sucks bad enough, we can just vote at any time and vote in a new government.
Well, I mean, not quite. I mean, the election timetable is set by the party in power in many cases. And then if there is a vote of no confidence and there's a replacement for that person can only be in so long. We'll take the UK, for example, because they all have a little bit different nuances. But in the UK, if there's a vote of no confidence and that person is replaced, which happened in recent memory, then there is a timetable. There has to be an election called within the next so many months. And so the prime minister gets to determine when that election is scheduled, but it has to fall within that specific time frame. So there is a set of rules and there's in place to ensure that there's kind of what they consider a snap election pretty quickly. But it doesn't just mean you can vote whenever you want. There is rules around it.
I guess I'm thinking of Israel because Israel seems like they've been through 5 elections in the past 18 months.
Well, they have, and that's because the coalitions keep falling apart. Yeah. So Israel, unlike the UK, is very fractured. They have so many different parties, and there's no party there that can gain a majority. So all of the governing parties that are in place are in coalitions with half a dozen or more parties, and that's how they maintain a majority. And if one party falls out of that coalition for any reason and rejects the government's approach to policy or even to one specific bill, then there is a vote of no confidence. And then there has to be an election held. And so that's typically, there's always been the complaint that parliamentary systems are more fragile due to that dynamic, because all it takes is the party in power losing a vote on one piece of legislation for the government to fall and for there to be a no confidence vote.
But on the flip side, you don't get stuck with shit like this.
You don't get stuck like this, yeah. So
and if the government's not moving forward at a pace that one of those parties isn't happy with, they can force it to move faster. Because
we're
if you
clearly
don't,
at the other extreme of that, and clearly what we have is not working. So the question is, like, there's got to be some movement to get us out of this moment of dysfunction, and just it's yeah.
I got nothing.
It's a good thing Brandon knows more about those other government types because we're just so desperate and so angry. Like, yeah, well, the British system must be better. Let's talk about them for a few minutes.
Well, and see, and those like parliamentary system and the vote of no confidence would work better here if we really had a multi-party democracy, but we don't. We have a 2-party system. If we could get to a place where we reform election laws to allow other parties to compete, and we had a true multi-party system, it would be easier to enact that type of legislation. But our system is designed for it.
We have a new standard now where the president will not be held accountable, right? I mean, how else does one interpret this with any baseline of ethics?
I mean, what is the area of behavior that could get the president impeached? Let's just run through a few. It's not his sexual conduct. We've seen that from multiple. That's not going to happen. It's not his personal conduct. Horrible human beings have occupied the office of presidency of the president. It's not their policies. It's not their. I mean,
it's not a conflict of interest or too much investment in proprieties. Yep.
I mean, what? Maybe this is where the Constitution falls short of maybe something more than 2 MFN sentences about something might be a little bit more needed to actually define how we would use something. I mean, I get it. We've ridden for 250 years on here's 3 vague sentences about owning a gun. Maybe we'll just fight about it some more. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think it warrants either we amend the numbers required to get to impeachment or we change the dynamics of how a president can be replaced. And there's probably a host of reforms and creative means that you can do that without calling it impeachment as well. I mean, we point to the parliamentary system because that's what we know, but that isn't to say that's the only way. But there clearly has to be some other options because there needs to be an option to remove a president for gross misconduct, abuse of power, for, in this case, instigating an insurrection. And the fact that we don't have that, I mean, the greatest challenge with today's vote is it gives cover for somebody worse than Trump to come along and do the same thing because there's no accountability.
Where's Pence in all this? That guy was all over the videos, and people talked about how close he was to being in more danger.
He's in hiding now. I mean, that's basically...
No, he hasn't made any statements, right? As far as I know, there's been no public visibility of him. I kind of wondered if maybe he'd come in at the last minute and say something, but...
Pence is looking out on that Lake Michigan of undulating ice, and he's like, there's no way. I'm not putting a foot down anywhere yet because the ground is shifting too much. I feel like I'm channeling Pence here. I still have a future in politics at the national level. I might want to run for president in 2024. You will not hear from me until we know what Trump's path forward is. I would not expect anything out of Mike Pence because there's just no upside to it. And the thing too about moving forward with Trump now, let's all remember there are multiple multi-billion-dollar lawsuits that Trump will be named as a defendant. I mean, he's going to be involved in. His language now is going to start having severe repercussions, and he has lost the shield of the presidency. Well, that man has been radio silent for over a month.
Not just the investigations that were predetermined prior to impeachment, but look, the Fulton County District Attorney in Georgia opening up an investigation into interference. There's going to be a host of lawsuits that come out of some of these states where he directly interfered and attempted to overturn the results through the pressure that he applied to local officials.
And the Department of Justice was looking at the racketeering one I read, and then also the IRS is after him. I mean, there's three government organizations right there, in addition to anything private that comes up.
And there's a New York state attorney, and now the state's attorney in Georgia. To your point, Brandon, they are coming hard. They have no ties to the federal government. I think they're going to do the best they can to try to bring an indictment against him.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. So we're going to see him in the news.
There's no escaping him for the foreseeable future.
I saw 3 graphics this week that had the 4 impeachments: Johnson, Clinton, Trump. Who am I missing?
Trump 2.
Trump 1, Trump 2.
Yeah, that's really what. Yeah.
The infographic was focused on the timing, the time it took for the House to impeach and the time of the Senate trial. This makes me crazy. Who gives a shit? Who cares if it's 1 week or 3 weeks?
Wrong is wrong. It doesn't change the
Yes, why
events
are we
that happen.
fascinated? And is there something that says we have to do this in 3 days? Where's the harm with taking some more time? I don't get it.
I do know Biden. Biden's on record as saying he hoped it went quickly because he wants to move on. And so I'm sure there's an element of the Democrats are listening to him. And if everybody went in knowing what the end result was, why keep dragging it out? You think it's going to sway these 47?
No.
Or 43, sorry.
Maybe that's the best way to look at this, Jason, is we knew what the high mark was when we went into this as the Democratic Party. And when it became abundantly clear you weren't going to get past that high mark, then it pivoted to don't damage yourself while you're here. And maybe this was the best outcome you could get.
Well,
but it's
the
not
triple
only
asterisk.
That. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say the triple asterisk after Trump's name for the history books is already in place. There'll be volumes written. So, and that's what this ultimately becomes part of, right? Because there isn't another influence of this particular episode.
But I think for Democrats as well, it's also about holding not only Trump accountable, but congressional Republicans accountable too, right? I think this vote was critical to have them on the record, either for convicting him or for acquitting him, because they need to be held accountable for their rhetoric and what contributing to the big lie, standing silent in some cases. So this is on their records just as much as it is on Trump now, and they're going to have to carry this vote with them to future elections and be called out for it, and rightfully so.
Do you think that there's much influence on these folks that are running later, though? Because the general public doesn't seem to be associating the two.
Well,
and in
think
fact, it's the opposite. If that stat is correct, where 69% of polled Republicans say they would not be likely to vote for the representative if they had voted to impeach, implies that they have already detached it. In fact, they will support these people no matter what. So I don't know how much of a red mark this is.
I think it's general elections, though, where some of these states can be in play. I think that's where really they're going to be held accountable, and really where it's going to become a issue on the Democratic side in terms of running ads, bringing this back into focus as much as possible, reminding the general electorate this. Granted, I agree. I think that if anything, it's a non-entity when it comes to Republican primary elections, because you still have the base that supports Trump by and large, but it's about setting the record straight for general electorates and being able to tie congressional Republicans to Trump, who will continue to be unpopular with the general electorate. And it's the fact it's reminding the electorate as well that congressional Republicans continue to tie themselves to Trump. They cannot disentangle themselves from Trump, and that's going to continue to be an albatross around their necks in future elections. They have not, this was an opportunity to do that. And granted, there's risk reward calculation because they lose a segment of the base who is Trump loyal to the extreme. But the fact that they cannot let Trump be and move on from Trump, it's going to continue to hurt them. And it's something they're going to continue to grapple with because the Trump era isn't over.
And I think what we're seeing is there's the new, maybe this is a new political science theory. Brent, I'm probably saying that wrong, but as partisanship rises, accountability drops. And I think what we're seeing is our partisan level has risen to the point accountability is not an option, because the two can't exist in the same space. I can't be hyper partisan and say I'm for accountability. Those two are
and you can't be hyper partisan and say you can be impartial. In an impeachment trial too. It just can't go hand in hand.
And I think that's what we're seeing. The level of partisanship we've hit has basically wiped out all accountability.
Brandon's theory of the accountability being held during the general is interesting, but I feel like that only holds if we see the same massive turnout numbers that we saw with the last election, which seems unlikely, right? Because otherwise the gerrymandering is going to be another influence. And we already know how close the vote was in most of these cases anyway. So unless you continue to see this massive turnout where you tip the scales just enough.
Yeah, but I think there's a couple of key factors to consider. Number one, the impacts of remote voting and vote by mail and drop-off boxes that occurred because of this pandemic. It's going to be very difficult, even though Republican officials at the state level are trying to do away with those, to completely remove those, because Americans have become accustomed to those voting methods now, and I think those are going to be expected as time goes on. It's going to be very difficult to revert back to only voting in person, more restrictions on advanced balloting. So that's number one. And number two, we saw that the Georgia runoffs, that turnout can be increased with the right messaging and the right appeals to voters. And so I think that was also a game changer as well, to showcase that we don't necessarily have to see turnoff drop substantially again when we coming up on the midterms in 2022 with the right messaging. And number three, Democrats, I think, if they are going to be able to mitigate the damage done by Republicans at the state level with redistricting and gerrymandering, which is going to happen, and that's going to be an extreme challenge for Democrats who only have a 5 to 6 vote hold on their House majority, they need to put forward some kind of national election reform bill. They need to get something across the finish line to be able to mitigate that standardizes election procedures across states to some degree, because that's their only viable opportunity.
But let me push back on that. Let me push back on that. So I think you guys' argument about accountability in general, I could get on board with if we would have retaken the Senate in mass in November. We didn't. And I'm gonna use Lindsey Graham as my example. So Lindsey Graham was anti-Trump, like right when he was running against him, told him this man will destroy the party and we'll deserve it. He gets elected, complete lapdog for 4 years, kisses his ass, does whatever he wants, embarrasses himself to tie himself to him. On January 6th, has the balls to stand up and say, I'm out, I'm done, and then votes not guilty. And just to drive my point home, there was $80 million raised for his opponent, right? He won by 9 points. Wow. After all of that, he won by 9 points. What accountability can be put on Lindsey Graham? And we're not even going to talk about Mitch McConnell, who is completely untouchable. So I could have believed that point if the Senate was 57, for the dibs, if people like Ernst and Collins and Graham would have lost. I think your point's valid. I see no evidence that says accountability is coming in any level. But I just don't see it. Yeah, the two guys in Georgia lost or Kelly Loeffler and Purdue lost in Georgia because Trump's a total moron. That will never happen again. There will never be another president who in that period basically tries to sabotage 2 Senate seats. So who, as the Trump era ends, who's been held accountable? I can't think of anybody.
Nobody yet. And so I agree with you, but I think accountability, it means also being strategic in which states you go after. I think that Democrats, became too gleeful and thought that there were these other states in reach, which turned out not to be the case. And there was a lot of money that was thrown to races that were just out of reach and were never going to be in reach, even with a massive influx of campaign cash, which we know now, right? No amount of campaign cash can make an unwinnable race winnable in some cases. So it's about being strategic in the states you target, and it's about having a ground game. And I would argue, yes, Trump was an awful candidate. Loeffler and Purdue were abysmal candidates, but you can't discount Stacey Abrams' work in Georgia in terms of registering voters. I mean, they were able to get voters to turn out in the Senate elections, the runoffs, that they were not able to do in the general, which is amazing. I mean, substantial number of voters. And there's something to be said about Arizona as well in the presidential election, that there were groups that were working in coordination to increase voter registration turnout there to a lesser degree. So if you emulate or have some type of strategy that emulates what Stacey Abrams was able to do in Georgia and some of these other fault line states that are right on the edge, like North Carolina, like Arizona, like Texas, you could have Texas in 3 to 5 years be the next Georgia. So again, the thing is that work hasn't been done. I mean, Stacey Abrams was the only one who did it, and she did it in Georgia. And Democrats just haven't put the time and money into that. Instead, they've spent online fundraising dollars and thrown that directly to campaigns when that money should have gone to nonpartisan groups that are get out the vote effort like Stacey was able to do.
I wonder if some of this is because for so long, Democrats have just assumed that shifting demographics would go in their favor and make up the difference. And meanwhile, Republicans had great ground game, great fundraising, and apparently the right candidates. And that takes, I was just about to say that trumps everything.
That's exactly right,
so,
Jason.
And therefore, Democrats got to quit thinking through this. Well, the shifting demographics are going to support us and get back to the basics of political fundraising, political ground game, registering to vote.
Exactly. And this cannot be emphasized enough. The Democrats had not knocked doors at all during the pandemic. I think the Biden campaign started knocking on doors in mid to late October, but the Republicans were knocking on doors all year long in 2020. They had a ground game. The Democrats did not have any ground game in Florida at all. There was no coordination to get out the vote or even to refute some of the wacky Republican BS that was going on in Miami-Dade with all of the socialist communist nonsense. There was no rebuke to that or refutation. So, there was a lot to be desired in terms of just not having a ground game at all. And again, a lot of it is hubris. It goes back to just assuming, we've got this locked up. We're going to have Miami-Dade again because Hillary won it by 20 some points. And it's just making these assumptions without doing the work in these communities to ensure that they feel like you're looking out for them.
And I've been running around for 20 years saying demographics is destiny in politics. And when Obama got elected, I spiked the football and said, see, I told you. And then when he easily beat Romney, I did it again and said, see, I've been telling you people this for 20 years. The demographics have finally tipped. We're in. Let's just be brutally honest with ourselves as Democrats. There's two things that got Trump acquitted: the phrase defund the police and the phrase mostly peaceful protest. That's what cost us our landslide victory, and that's what cost us Trump's second impeachment. We have to, as Democrats, take a really, really, really hard look at our messaging that we did over the summer around the defund the police and the Black Lives Matter protest. Those things have cost us hugely, to use a word from Donald Trump. It was not the right message. It wasn't calibrated correctly. It wasn't thought out. And what we did is what I accuse the Republicans of doing all the time. We let other people control our brand, defined what defund the police meant, and tag that slogan to our brand. And we've never been able to get past that. And you see it today. 3 incompetent boobs playing the role of lawyer can stumble into the Senate chamber, shout those two things, defund the police, and you guys didn't lift a finger when large sections of cities were being burnt, and most Americans understand what you're talking about. We have got to unpack the whole defund the police and what is a riot and what is a protest.
Those are great points. The defund the police, I always thought was ridiculous, but I think just in January, I had even used the phrase of mostly peaceful, which is that doesn't compare to imagery on the television of Portland burning or whatever, that's
if you're pointing out somebody else's hypocrisy by you yourself acting like a hypocrite, it generally doesn't work. And I think that's what we found out now. And there are certain things that the American people will always pull back from, and an absence of law and order is one of them. And we just fundamentally did not calibrate our message correctly. And we're still paying for that.
And candidates that equivocate on law and order, and I think, Biden was the only one out of most national Democrats who came out very strongly saying that, we're for peaceful protests and we're not for rioting. And that was the problem with most of the other national Democrats, is that they did not come out strongly initially, and it opened them up to criticism. And then they were on the defensive about that. And
no Democrat ever said, here's my plan instead of defunding the police.
Yeah.
No Democrat ever said, hey, the police play just an absolutely vital role, in shorting them on what they need to do their job every day, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, is just not right. Not only is it not right, it's immoral. You can't take the people who are basically pledging to go protect you and not fund them and put them in a dangerous spot. That's ridiculous.
But part of the problem is the definition behind that, right, Craig? Because I feel like the opponents were easily able to take that and say, defunding the police. So you want to basically ensure that there is no viable police force to defend our communities. So they were able to define that immediately as communities being vulnerable, when there are others who said that's not what we mean at all. We mean being able to reallocate money that should go to mental health to make the jobs of the police easier, to provide them assistance, mental health co-responders. So there's all of these practical reforms that most people agree on, which is what got put into that definition of defund the police. But that's why the whole phrase defund the police should have been shut down from the beginning, because you're on the defensive if you're a Democrat with that phrase, and you're trying to redefine it when it's already been defined in most people's minds. And so you can't use that phrase. You should have chosen another phrase. And any Democrats that continue to use that phrase at all were only hurting their colleagues and every Democrat that was up for election that had to be put on defense. We have local Democrats here in Kansas City who are running for office who signed petitions that had all of these reforms listed, and they had one line that talked about defund, and they were put on defensive, and mailers went out against them, and they were having to say, no, this isn't actually what I support. And at that point, you've lost the argument. It's over.
I agree with almost all of this right here, but one thing that still frustrates me about the law and order phrase, especially with associating with Republicans. I mean, shoot, one of my neighbors has a law and order flag out there. That tells you how strong that messaging is. But how can a Republican associate the party with law and order after the last 60 days? What about what we've seen here aligns with law and order? I mean, that wasn't orderly. It wasn't an orderly transition of power. Many laws were broken on the 6th, and we just saw somebody get away with chaos.
I wish I had an answer. I don't.
Yeah.
So are people just ignoring that? Because right now, I don't think you can call law and order on either side, either party.
The problem is it's this whataboutism. It allows the other side to say, well, what about you guys? And they are able to divert and distract. And so then it doesn't keep focus on the argument. So it allows people to play this kind of wishy-washy game of, well, this is bad, but what they did was bad. Well, maybe we can't, prosecute or, put too much blame here. And so you have to be able to have kind of a rock-ribbed solid argument that's as immune from charges of hypocrisy as possible. And so that's the problem you face.
Which doesn't align itself well with politics.
No,
right?
It doesn't.
It's so married to hypocrisy right now. Yes.
Well, the other thing here, too, guys, to remember, too, is I think part of the problem with demographics, to go back to that argument for a while, is Democrats assuming that all demographic groups behave the same or that all minority groups are kind of in lockstep, which they're not. Hispanics versus African Americans, even versus subsets of the Hispanic communities we've seen, right? So Cubans versus Mexicans versus Central Americans. So their needs are vastly different. And a good example is Hispanic Americans have a much more kind of pro-law and order mindset than African Americans because they don't face the same level of discrimination and haven't been part of our history that goes back to times of slavery that African Americans have. So you have many Hispanic segments, particularly if you look at like Laredo and the Rio Grande, like that area where there was a boost for Trump, in this election. And, the anecdotal stories are that these groups were turned off by the rioting over the summer because they tend to have a much more kind of pro-law and order mindset. So it's about also recognizing that, they don't all think monolithically, that there are vast differences from in each of these minorities groups and each of these ethnicities based on their own experiences in America.
Well, Mike always talks about political courage, and I always make fun of him when he talks about it because it's like, again, you're expecting behavior out of people that are never going to show that courage. I feel very vindicated in that nobody political courage is just that's off the table. We should not expect that anymore outside outside of we shouldn't expect that out of our politicians. The other thing too is for the Democratic Party, if you're going to continue to govern by inspirational poster, defund the police or some catchy phrase, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hang with you. It was an easy thing to get out of the defund the police branding was actually put out a plan of what you would do to actually solve the problem, which nobody, to my knowledge on the Dem side, ever did. So when that comes back and bites us square in the ass yet again, we've earned it. And I just hope we learn a lesson. My last part of my rant here is Jonah Goldberg has a phrase, character is destiny. We cannot forget that. Character is destiny. This was always going to be the outcome to the Trump presidency. Brandon, how many times have you and I looked at each other in this podcast and said, this bill will come due and it's going to be a big one? There's no way around it. I think, too, for the Republicans and for the Democrats, the bill's come due. The bill came due for the Democrats when we didn't have the blowout election we thought, and we actually lost ground with key demographic groups that if we don't get a handle on, this whole demographic is destiny thing is right down the shitter, and we're right back to where we were. The Republicans, you're so much in disarray, you couldn't slap your ass with two hands right now. You have no leader, you have no policy, you have no platform. So as the American people, now it's, welcome to the big time because both parties today basically have officially declared themselves dumpster fires.
And there's the number and volume of Americans that are registering as unaffiliated is only growing by the droves because of this just unhappiness with the two major parties and, record low approval ratings with both. But if the Democrats were smart, they would be investing in ground game efforts centered within these communities, hiring people who are of these communities to form these organizations, register people to vote, listen to their needs, their concerns. That was what was done in Arizona with the local Hispanic community there. That's why Arizona went against the grain. The Hispanic community came out in stronger numbers for Biden and against Trump than they did back in 2016, unlike Texas and unlike Florida, because of, again, the unique organizations that were operating at the ground level. So it can be done. It just takes work, and it takes not taking communities for granted. And again, if I was DNC chair, which I'm not, I would be investing in Texas, North Carolina.
Better than what we have.
Well, that point about the shift in unaffiliated voters, that's apparently occurring. Like, if we could get some data from the Secretary of State for Missouri and Kansas, that'd be really interesting, because there's how you either form a new party or fix your party going forward. You go after that.
Brandon, that's 140,000 people nationwide, I think, is the stat I saw, have changed, have dropped Republican. That's a drop in an ocean. It spread over the number of states. That's not statistically valid, I don't think, to show
anything. It's only over a couple of weeks too, right? So that's a couple of weeks data. So it's significant based on the time frame coming right off of a national election. So the key is to see if that continues to grow in time, and if we see that remain steady with those increases over the next several months, because that could portend a sea change in terms of support. So that's something.
Yeah, but just to counter that slightly, though, don't you think it's emotion that does it? So they're capturing onto that now. And what happens when this plays out? Because Americans have such short-term memory, right? Like January 6th is already becoming distant. Like, you fast forward to the summer, I just don't see this big trend of people leaving the party because the major event just occurred.
And do you think Americans revert back to form? Yeah, and how long does January 6th remain in our collective conscious?
Guys, we're arguing the wrong point. We're arguing as if this means anything to electing a president. Presidents are elected by under 100,000 votes in 5 states and 77 counties. That's it. Nothing else is irrelevant. I mean, it just is what it is.
It comes back to election reform. How the hell do we get election reform? Because none of this changes otherwise.
So if 140,000 Republicans unregister in New York, that's done nothing. The national elections, again, are about 5 states, 70 counties, and it comes down to 75 to 100,000 votes. That's it. That's what the Electoral College has done for us. And I don't know any way out of that, because we're talking about big structural changes that nobody is going to sign up for. Because, again, you see the shifting ice. I'm not standing anywhere that's going to tip over. I don't think I could be any more negative. I'll try, but I think I don't know if I could be.
Do you want to switch to some good news?
I haven't shouted I'm moving to Canada or anything, so that's better. I want to talk about – the 2 topics I've left to talk about. One is extremely negative with the Lincoln Project, but I do want to talk about Nikki Haley a little bit in that Politico article that she did, where she basically declared her intent. Nikki Haley's running for president in 2024. I think everybody knows that. She basically said, I'm running for president and I'm not tying myself to Trump. She's the first person to come out and say the future of the Republican Party does not include Donald Trump.
And it's quite an about face for Nikki Haley, right? Because she had been somebody who had been seen as someone who had enabled Trump, and as recently as 3 or 4 weeks ago, made a flippant comment on one of the Sunday shows where she said, well, Trump's conduct in the aftermath of the insurrection, it wasn't great. And I think it was Amanda Carpenter who said, that's what you say about like a Netflix series you don't like. It wasn't great. It was, so she is really, it's interesting to see her do a 180-degree turn now. But the question is now, will other Republicans follow? What does it mean for the 2024 presidential race? I mean, she's setting herself apart. It's interesting.
Well, so I read most of that article. It's super long, but when you say 180-degree turn, because I interpreted it as she was sort of still threading a bit of a needle there. She sounded softly turning from him in many of the quotes I read. And when she said that, well, he believes what he believes, like that, like she wouldn't outright dispute him. She'd just say, well, he believes that, and therefore it's somehow passable. Did I misinterpret that?
No, that's the fascinating part of the article.
Yeah.
So here is someone as intelligent as Nikki Haley, as politically savvy as Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is a daughter of Indian immigrants who got herself elected governor in South Carolina and then took the Confederate flag down. From a political standpoint, she is as talented as it gets. She told Tim Alberta, who wrote the article, well, he believes it, Tim. I don't know what else I can do. I mean, he believes he won the election. This was like in December. You tell him he's wrong. You treat him as an adult and say, I don't care what you believe in. This didn't happen. So that, to me, I agree with you, Jason. That was the most fascinating part to this article. So you're making an excuse, Nikki Haley, for you're enabling Trump by saying, well, he deeply believes this. I just didn't want to go against. But that's insane. That's disqualifying as a president.
Well, she's a politician. That's what the word I kept thinking of when I read that was politics, politics, politics. And she's very good at politics.
Yep. I had the same thing. And that she used phrases like, we're disappointed in Donald Trump. Donald Trump led us down a path that we should not have followed.
Yes.
Those are very distancy comments.
Yeah.
But let's see what happens.
But careful. It is very careful verbiage, which I think you're right about. And I may have reacted too strongly just because, I mean, the Republicans have been so lame. I mean,
well, you're not wrong there, Brandon, because nobody else has done even it softly.
Not even that
right?
level. Yeah.
So if it's not a 180-degree turn, maybe it's a 90-degree turn, but nobody else has made a 90-degree turn. Right. So you're both right. It's just fascinating to see how she's parsing that.
And even now, she feels the need to parse her words. Nikki Haley is going to steamroll to the 2024 nomination. I mean, think about that group of morons that were on the stage in 2015, 17 of them. Which one of them could hang with Nikki Haley? None. She'll destroy all of them. What I need to find out more about Nikki Haley is what really is her character, because what is her destiny going to be? Does she really believe in anything, or is she just sticking a thumb up in the air, seeing which way the wind blows, and that's how she goes? I have a feeling maybe that's what she's doing. She's putting a trial balloon up to see what happens, and she'll adjust from there.
So is it her and Harris?
So much. Yeah.
I'm interested in Nikki Haley. I just don't know what's there. What's there could be really good. Could not be. I just don't know. I've not seen her enough on a national level to know what does she believe in. I don't know. And I guess moving forward for me, that's going to be the question I've got to ask about any politician. You need to define in writing, in stone, what is your character? What do you believe in? Because I'm just not willing to trust anybody in politics anymore that doesn't have a track record and a history of a strong character foundation.
But that's not what the average voter is looking for. Clearly, that doesn't matter.
Then I'll register it as a protest vote. But I mean, I could live with Mitt Romney being president. I don't like his tax policies. I mean, I could disagree with 1,000 things, but at least he is a person of integrity and character who's not going to act like a total.
And will surround himself with other adults who will give good counsel, and he can make his decision from there.
We're right back where we were, Brandon, I feel like 2 years ago. Any reasonable adult will do.
Right. Well, and we go back to look at how many Democrats have said that they would have traded Mitt Romney to have Mitt Romney win in 2012 if we could have skipped 100%. Donald Trump. Because, I mean, think about it, too. I mean, so much of what Obama was able to accomplish was through executive orders, which were undid by Trump anyway. Yeah. So, the only lasting legacy is the Affordable Care Act, and that was passed in the first term. Second term, there was very little that was lasting because of the dynamics of Republicans holding the Congress.
And it's really starting to chap my ass when some senator gets on TV and I don't like all these executive orders. Do your job. Tell us what's wrong to open up the Senate. Debate something. I don't know. Tell us what you think about something. I don't know. You're only a U.S. senator. What could you do? I'm not asking, sir.
Craig's nice and fired up. I love it.
This is ridiculous. Let me ask the question this way. Jason, if the United States were a company that you worked for, wouldn't you quit?
Yes.
If your CEO basically if your CEO basically called a meeting of the employees, told them that the CFO had been stealing from them and they should do something about it, and they tore apart the office trying to find the CFO, you would say, this is really messed up. I need to leave, right?
Well, and it's not even just the CEO. It's the whole executive leadership team is condoning the behavior and or in his ear, to influence it negatively.
When you approach another member of the C-suite to say, I don't think this is right, they just look at you and say, we don't even know what you're talking about. You're totally wrong.
You vote with your feet then, yeah.
If America were a company, if America were a club, we'd all quit. We'd all want out. And that's a horrible thing to say.
We love our country and we want it to get better. And therefore we keep hoping that something will change that makes it on the right trajectory. And it seems to not be there today.
Well, and think about it from the standpoint, if we were a publicly traded corporation and we were trying to gain outside investment, I mean, who would invest in us? I mean, after all this, so what does this say to the rest of the world?
Somebody might short sell us,
right? The rest of the world that looks to America for leadership, and we can't even hold our own accountable. It makes us look like a failed state in some ways, politically speaking.
Just on a lighter note, Jason, I've been fascinated with the Wall Street Beats Reddit forum, and I went there actually thinking that I was going to find some sort of investment advice and some sort of intelligent talk. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And are there people out there that really invest money? Because that group makes a record. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of.
Did you see there's a House panel hearing on that next week? And not only does it have the CEO of Robinhood and Reddit, but and like some dudes from Melvin and Citadel, the hedge funds, but it also has, and I'm going to put it in quotes, Roaring Kitty, the main guy on Wall Street Bets who started the whole Wall Street GameStop trend.
And I literally hope that guy. I hope
he's going to testify.
Oh my gosh!
And I hope that guy shows up.
TV.
I hope that guy shows up drinking a Red Bull, smoking a blunt with a kitty shirt on, and says, "Meet the face of the new Wall Street, folks."
I hope he cashed in some of his stock somewhere along the way, because we never did follow up on that. Last time we talked, it was like almost in the 300s, right? It's 52
it's way down now.
Or something now.
The bubble has officially burst. Which is
to no surprise of anyone.
Let's talk about bubbles bursting, the Lincoln Project. Are you guys as fascinated about this as I am with the demise of this with this group?
So is this all because of the one co-founder's immoral behavior that came out, or is there another angle to this that I'm missing?
Well,
that's not enough. I'm just saying.
So the angle is
that sounded bad.
What did they know and when did they know it? And the fact that has come out now that they learned about these allegations back in June, and this co-founder was still remained, part of the organization, really through the end of the year until January. And it's an odd turn of events because John Weaver went on some type of medical leave in September. So many of his accusers and those within the organization, employees who were victims of his harassment, assumed that, they had totally disengaged from him, the organization had, which didn't happen. And then he kind of came back online near the end of the year, like November timeframe, December. So it's more the fact that they didn't take action immediately, that they just, they knew about it and then they didn't respond and just kind of let this happen.
So I guess the analogy that I would use is the three of us are going to start the Washington Project, and we are going to go hard at somebody political. And it catches on and people like what we're doing. And all of a sudden we start raising money in the tens of millions, like a lot of money, way more money than we ever thought we would raise. What is the first thing we would do? We would say, guys, we have to keep track of all this money because we are throwing fireballs at people. We are putting out content designed to ruin people's careers. This is hardball. And we're all good with that because politics is a big boy game and that's fine. But if it were me, the first thing I would do is whoever's in charge of the money, I need to know every day that we are doing what we're saying we're doing with this money. Because you should expect that the first slip up we have, people are going to come at us. That's how this is going to work because we're going at everyone. The problem with the Lincoln Project is like Steve Schmidt last night when Bill Maher asked him, where's the 90 million, Steve? Where'd all that money go? I mean, that's a lot of money. I get it. Putting some videos together is expensive. Is it $90 million expensive? And Steve Schmidt's was, well, 70, 80% of the money went to, that's not what I asked. What I asked is, where is the 90 million? Is it gone? Who got paid what? Steve Schmidt also last night, did you see his resignation letter?
No.
I found it to be appalling. It's a 5-page letter that starts off with how he was molested as a 13-year-old at a camp.
At a Boy Scout camp.
A Boy Scout camp, then went on to talk about his lifelong struggle with depression, then talked about, well, I'm stepping back from the Lincoln Project. The first 4 pages of the letter were an obvious attempt to drum up sympathy. I found that to be horrifying. And if you haven't seen that, it's worth a read. Here's my assessment of the Lincoln Project. It's the old phrase, when you dance with the devil don't change, he changes you. Trump has a superpower that he can make good intentioned people sink to his level. And his one superpower is to act like a moron and do horrible things and bring out the worst in people and everybody around him. And I think that's what he did with the Lincoln Project. And let's face it, that's just straight up masturbating is what they did. They got in their little echo chamber. Everybody said how great they were, and they just fell in love with themselves.
Well, and in any election, the thing I like the least about the political run-up is the attack ads and the negativity. And here's an organization that, well, you can get your bowl of popcorn out and chew away as you see these slickly produced videos against the guy that you don't care for. They're ultimately just making attack ads and disparaging other candidates. Like how that has a run for a short term, but what's the end game of that?
Although, again, we go back to everybody says they don't like attack ads, but they work. And that's why both sides of them, there will always be negative ads because that is what moves people. Positive ads do not move voting
But
behavior.
you don't elect somebody by just consistently attacking somebody else. You've got to have a candidate for people to turn to. And to my knowledge, they never endorsed anybody else, right?
No, I
mean,
so
what's the end game? They just shoot at Trump. Okay, well, Trump's gone now. Now what? And all the money you raise, now what?
And what's the future? Yeah, and I do think the money argument's very problematic, and that's kind of a different argument than obviously the thing with John Weaver, which needs to be talked about. So, yeah, they did implode. I think that there will be remnants of the Lincoln Project. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that because I think that there will be other organizations that probably take up the mantle for Never Trump disaffected Republicans. You have the Republican Accountability Project, which used to be Republicans voting against Trump. So there are other organizations out there that can rise to the occasion. People forget too that they were started to be in disarray back in December, I believe. Mike Madrid left the organization back in December. There were a few others who started leaving around that time frame. For me, the question is what comes out of it? Which organization takes up that mantle? And what do they do now? Like, where does the focus turn now that Trump is no longer in office? Because I think there's a mission there. And the question is, how do you harness that energy?
We may have to start doing a video podcast because, again, people see Brandon with the dog on his lap. That's the viral moment we're going for.
That dog loves you. That's awesome.
That dog and it's so quiet, too. It's just sitting there looking at you, giving me a little lick every once in a while. Just say, how's it going?
How old is your dog, Brandon?
He's 2.
2, okay.
And you said you got him during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I adopted him from a shelter back in the beginning of October. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's very attached, obviously.
Our dog's looking at me this morning or today like, I'm not going for a walk. I'm not going out there. I'm going to run out on the patio or the deck. I'm going to pee on the grill, and I'm running right back in. Don't close the door because I just want to run right back in when I'm done.
You wake up, it looks like it's Wisconsin out there. I don't blame him.
I don't either, yeah.
So I guess the only thing really I'm fascinated by Trump anymore is where is his reappearance? And I didn't think he could go this long without, some sort of meaningful engagement. So is he holding his powder for what? What now that impeachment's over, when do we think Trump reemerges onto the scene?
I think I had read that he had been advised repeatedly to be quiet these last few weeks for fear of negatively influencing his own impeachment trial, right? Well, now that that's behind him, it's going to be hard for him to resist the spotlight, don't you think?
I don't see how he does. The question is, will his influence be mitigated by the fact that he lacks a social media presence now? He doesn't have that bullhorn he had when he was on Twitter. I have heard he wants to form a PAC, and he is laser focused on going after Republicans that supported his impeachment. So that'll probably be where his focus is.
He's another one. Where'd the $276 million you raised from December 4th to January 20th? Where'd that go?
He hasn't spent barely any of that money. I mean, he still has, I think they said there's been a couple million, like 2 or 3 million that's been spent out of that. The rest of it he still has.
He's going to save it for his legal defense fund here.
There you go.
He's going to need it the next few months.
Yeah, but when you donated to it, there was some fine print that said, while this is intended for the legal defense fund, I can spend this money however I want, including buying shit I need or /want. I don't know what Nancy – I've got Fox News on, of course, on the background, and Nancy Pelosi just went batshit crazy during her press conference. She tried to walk off twice, I think, and walked back to the podium to say more. So she either got a question she didn't like or something. But yeah, she appears to be a bit fired up about this. That doesn't do anything because it isn't the great lesson we've learned with the Trump presidency. We all need to be much, much more picky about who we even allow to say they're a candidate for presidency. If there was ever a test that we need to administer, now would be the time, isn't it?
You're forgetting how many people still support this guy.
I know it.
That is, but part of how you can resolve this, Craig, is reforms to the primary system in both parties. To ensure that a candidate like Trump can't escape unscathed with just a plurality of the vote in primary after primary, and then make it to nomination at the convention. Maybe you put in place, some guardrails that just aren't there now.
I don't know what those would be, but I don't know. Right now, I don't have much faith that we can self-correct. I just don't see where is the self-correction coming? What is the event that makes this better? I don't think there's any unity or healing on the horizon. I just don't see it.
It's been a bad few weeks. But you know what? Maybe in a couple, we're sitting down and we're talking about the policies that Biden managed to pass or something. I don't know. There's got to be some point. This era of politics ends because there is a new administration in place now. They are attempting to do good work. There are a lot of other leaders in place, and this has been dominating the headlines, but it won't forever.
Let me bust this out. So my experiment watching Fox is come to an end because I think I have cracked the code with what Fox does. And then once you know it, you don't have to watch it anymore. But number one, Fox News has positioned the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline as something that will kill between 50 and 80,000 jobs. That is absolute 100% horseshit. That is not the scope of that pipeline. There was about 1,000 people working on it when the permit got canceled. There were about 50 full-time jobs. Yes, over the course of the whole project, there would be 10,000 jobs, most of them very temporary. Because again, you weld the pipe as it comes through your area, and then other people weld it as it goes somewhere else. So yes, it would have created jobs, but it would create temporary jobs. My point here being is this is part of the culture war. It's us against them. Look what they did to you. Brandon, you would be stunned if somehow I could calculate up. I bet they spent at least 2 hours a day in total coverage on the Keystone XL pipeline. And how bad they're screwing over Americans who are just trying to make a living.
I don't doubt it. Because their profits, their viewership is dependent upon, being able to continue to format those culture wars, as you said. That's why they exist. Without that, they lack a purpose and they lack an audience.
Is the Hunter Biden story gone now then?
Oh, no. That's just another China walking through the front door to screw you, Jason, and look what you're doing. Here's what I finally figured out about Fox News. So when MSNBC is going to run a story, they take that story and the first question they ask is, how does our audience want this story framed? And they find the story and the facts and a framework to tell the story to the people that are watching MSNBC. Fox does something a little bit different. They take a story and say, what people do our audience want to hear this story from? And then they flow the story through that individual that relates to their audience. So, for example, the story of the Keystone Pipeline, there is no context about the environmental concerns. There is no context about, hey, we have this huge pipeline that how are we going to protect this thing? There's no context about this has been canceled before. That all goes away. And they tell the story through the guy in Texas who's a welder who just got shit on. And that's the whole fact pattern flows through that person. When you tell the story that way, the results are very different from saying, we're going to start with the facts of the story and tell it to the audience in a way that the audience wants to hear it. So think about it. Every story, you don't start with the facts. You find a person that was impacted by the story that looks like your audience, and you tell the story through them.
It's not a balanced presentation then, huh?
Well,
aren't they supposed to be fair and balanced?
It's a strong way to do it because everything is personal. Everything is linked to something. And that's the power of Fox News.
It's emotion instead of
everything
facts.
Is emotion. Yeah. Everything is, look what horrible happened to this person. You can relate to this person. This horrible thing can happen to you.
If you remember,
it's obviously successful.
It's successful. Well, and they fit what I called, I created that term, realtors of resentment on my minute pod. That's what Fox News is, right? They stoke resentment. It's about doing that day in and day out. And that's what the culture wars are all about, us versus them. They have to have conflict. And if there is no conflict, then there is no Fox News.
We always try to end on something positive. That was a quick hour and 8 minutes that went by.
Brief, positive palate cleanser, and then we can't forget Brandon has an announcement. So let's do the palate cleanser first to, calm everybody down. I have a quick one. It's good news. We heard this week, drowned out by all the impeachment stuff, that both Biden and Fauci have said COVID vaccines are coming to everybody else. I thought it was funny that they gave different dates. Fauci said April and Biden said July, but hey, that's by this summer. So that's a lot better than the end of the year. My parents, who are both over 65, got it today, which is, it's like a holiday for me then. And Craig, a little bit of follow up. I think you said 2 weeks ago, your mother-in-law was about to get one.
She got her first shot.
So look at that. This is
weird. My parents,
positive.
My parents are in Florida, the home base for all old people in the United States, and they haven't got the shot because there are no rules. It's all first come, first serve.
Yeah.
So as my dad has said, we'll pull up to a Publix where they say they're going to give us shots, and there's 4,000 people waiting.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that will just I don't know how long it's going to take them to get it.
My wife was trying to schedule it for her mother, and she compared it to back in the 90s when you were trying to get Ticketmaster tickets. Like you're on a website just trying to grab these little slots against who knows how many other people vying for it.
And in my mother-in-law's case, so my mother-in-law, she's the contact on the email. My wife is the contact for the phone call because Jody can hear better on the phone than my mother-in-law can because she's 83. They called her to tell her where to go. And then they gave her a website and they read the URL to her. They're like, you need to go https://. This is an 83-year-old woman who has 2 cochlear implants. I mean, it's like, what are you doing? So I'm glad that she got the shot. I'm glad Missouri is picking up pace. But to your point, the process so far has not been ideal.
Okay, Brandon, tell us your news.
So I am moderating a political panel. It's sponsored by the Mainstream Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization on the Kansas side that fights for moderation in state politics and, state, federal, local politics. So this panel is called The Road Ahead, Transcending the Political Divide, and it's looking at the outcome of the November election, what we've seen transpire over the last several years with the rise in disinformation and intense polarization, and what are some solutions to overcoming this. So I will be moderating this panel. It'll be online via Zoom. It is February 25th at 6 p.m. Central Time. You can register for it online if you go to mainstreamcoalition.org or find the Mainstream Coalition's Facebook page. It's one of their events on that page. The panelists include Congresswoman Sharice Davids from the 3rd District of Kansas, former Senate candidate Barbara Bollier, Stephanie Sharp, who's a political consultant here on the Kansas side, and then the Reverend Adam Hamilton of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection. So it should be an interesting panel. It should be a very good discussion. Looking forward to that. And anybody that's interested in it, register online.
That's an awesome panel. You'll be great on that as the moderator. Congratulations!
I hope so. Yeah, I'm writing questions as we speak and generating questions, and so hopefully it'll be a good discussion.
Why don't you lead off with, can anybody explain why Roger Marshall is such a douche? And then you look right at the woman who ran again with Barbara Bollier and say, how did you lose to that guy?
Maybe don't take that approach, Brandon.
Maybe not. I will say about Marshall, though, it's amazing. He's one of the few who can establish himself so quickly as somebody who's just completely incompetent. I mean, it was no time. I mean, he's only been in there, less than a month.
He's trying to act like a butthole. That's the only explanation to it. Just think about that. In this crop, this is why I'm so aggravated. In the election of 2020, where we were supposed to ride to dominance in the Senate, we get morons like Tuberville and Marshall in there. Way to go, folks! Isn't that awesome? That's what we need. Tommy, let's get more goddamn football coaches in the Senate. That's what we need.
I tried for the palate cleanser, guys. I tried.
Sorry. That's what we need. Who thinks that's a good idea? Let's get Auburn's football coach who can. It's just ridiculous. And they kicked out Doug Jones. You got to be shitting me.
Who was one of the most capable. That was the attorney that prosecuted the bombers of the church at the school in Montgomery where those little girls were killed back in the 60s. I mean, and so they threw out that guy for Tuberville.
So ignore my last rant. Everybody register for Brandon's Zoom thing. That will be very positive and a very good time. And Brandon will do an excellent job.
Thank you.
I
absolutely won't hear anybody like me just scream and rant and shit like that on that. So really much time. Does anybody have anything? I kind of killed the ending. I kind of crapped on the let's do something positive. So I don't know if the day is the day that anything positive was going to stick.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's utter silence from everybody.
Yeah, I think we've been as positive as we can. Let's call it at that. That's our hour. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.